doesn't disappoint. Straight out of a fairy tale. Wow. It's gonna be horrible to walk through this. Feels like I'm in Disneyland or some kind of fairy tale castle. Like the Sleeping Beauty.
China is home to the oldest civilization on Earth. 5,000 years of history, dynasties, wars, and secrets buried so deep that most of the world has never heard of them. But here's what no travel guide will tell you. There are places across China so disturbing, so unsettling, so heavy with history that locals refuse to go near them. Today, we're going to all 12 of them, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. Fengdu Ghost City, Chongqing. Let's start with a place that was literally built for the dead. Fengdu Ghost City sits on Ming Mountain along the Yangtze River in Chongqing, and it has been associated with death, demons, and the underworld for over 2,000 years. This isn't a Halloween attraction or a theme park. This is an ancient sacred complex that the Chinese have believed for centuries is the actual gateway to the afterlife. The story goes back to the Han Dynasty, around 200 AD, when two officials named Wang Fangping and Yin Changsheng came to this mountain to practice Taoism. Their combined names, Yin Wang, translate loosely to King of Hell. Over time, the mountain became associated with the ruler of the underworld, and the temples that were built here weren't built to worship gods of prosperity or good fortune. They were built to appease the dead. Walk through Fengdu today, and you'll pass through the ghost-torturing pass, cross the Bridge of Helplessness, and stand before the Palace of Hell, a massive temple complex designed to mirror exactly what ancient Chinese texts describe as the afterlife. Inside, you'll find statues of souls being weighed, judged, and punished. There are halls depicting the 18 levels of hell, each one more grotesque than the last. Statues of demons performing tortures that Chinese folklore says await the dishonest, the cruel, and the corrupt. Here's what makes it genuinely unsettling. Locals don't treat this place as fiction. Even today, families visit to make offerings for deceased relatives, believing that the rituals performed here affect what happens to their loved ones in the next world. During certain festivals, particularly the Hungry Ghost Festival in late summer, the area fills with incense smoke, paper money burned as offerings, and the sounds of mourning. But outside of those festivals, the place is mostly avoided. Locals from surrounding villages don't go up Ming Mountain at night. Taxi drivers in Fengdu City will hesitate if you ask to be dropped near the mountain after dark. One thing that gets overlooked in the tourist brochures, a portion of the original Fengdu, the actual riverside town, was submerged when the Three Gorges Dam flooded the area in the early 2000s. Over 100,000 residents were displaced. The mountain temples remain, but the community that lived beneath them for generations is gone. Locals say you can still hear the old town's bells on quiet nights when the water is calm. Whether you believe that or not, standing at the edge of that riverbank at dusk, looking up at demon statues half hidden in mountain fog, is enough to make even the most skeptical visitor feel something they can't quite name. The Suicide Caves of Hainan Island. Most people think of Hainan Island as China's Hawaii, a tropical resort destination with beaches, palm trees, and luxury hotels. And in the resort zones, that's exactly what it looks like. But venture away from those manicured coastlines into the island's interior, and you'll find a side of Hainan that the tourism board doesn't advertise. A network of remote caves scattered through the jungle-covered hills that locals flatly refuse to enter, and with very good reason. During World War II, Hainan Island was occupied by Japanese forces from 1939 to 1945. The occupation was brutal by any measure. Scholars estimate that somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 Hainanese civilians died during this period, out of a pre-war population of roughly 3 million. The caves scattered across the interior of the island were used during this period in ways that historians are still piecing together. Some were used as hiding places by fleeing civilians. Some were execution sites. Others became the final resting places of people who entered and never came out. What makes these specific caves eerie rather than merely historically tragic is the behavior of the local population around them, behavior that has persisted for generations after the war ended. Villages near the cave networks in the Central Highlands have maintained informal prohibitions against entering certain cave systems. These aren't posted signs or official government warnings. They're passed down verbally, the way you'd pass down any piece of essential local knowledge. Don't go in there. Don't go near there after dark. Don't let your children play near the entrance. Researchers and journalists who have attempted to document these sites report a phenomenon that is difficult to explain scientifically but is consistently described: an unusual, almost pressurized silence inside the caves. Not just quiet, silence of a quality that feels intentional, like something absorbed all the sound. Some report nausea, others describe a heaviness, a resistance, as if the space itself is discouraging entry. Geologists note that certain cave formations can create infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below the range of human hearing that trigger anxiety responses in the human body. That's the rational explanation. The local explanation is simpler. These are places where tremendous suffering happened in enclosed spaces, and that suffering left something behind. Whether you frame it spiritually or psychologically, the result is the same. Generations of people who live within walking distance of these caves choose consistently and deliberately to stay out. The Chinese government has been slow to formally document or memorialize many of these sites. They're an uncomfortable reminder of an occupation the national narrative doesn't spend much time on, which means the caves sit there, unmarked and unacknowledged, exactly as they have been for 80 years. The drowned city of Shicheng, Qiandao Lake. Imagine an entire city, 1,300 years old, with temples, archways, ornate stone staircases, and intact streets, sitting perfectly preserved at the bottom of a lake. Not ruins, not rubble, an intact city. That is Shicheng, the Lion City, and it sits 60 to 40 feet beneath the surface of Qiandao Lake in Zhejiang province. It is one of the most astonishing archaeological sites in the world, and almost no one outside of China has heard of it. Shicheng was built during the Tang dynasty around 621 AD, and it stood for over 1,300 years as a thriving city in the Shinan River Valley. In 1959, the Chinese government decided to build a hydroelectric dam, the Shinan River Dam, and the valley needed to be flooded to create the reservoir. Over 300,000 people were displaced. 27 towns and almost 1,400 villages were submerged. And at the bottom of the newly created lake, Shicheng sank beneath the surface, where it has sat ever since, remarkably preserved by the cold, sediment-filtered water. Divers who have explored Shicheng describe an experience that goes beyond archaeology. The city is intact in a way that is cognitively disorienting. You swim through streets that look like they were abandoned yesterday, past doorways that still stand, past stone lions that still guard the entrances to buildings that no longer have roofs above them, but still have floors beneath your fins. The preservation is so complete that carved decorations on the stonework are still sharp. Wooden structures that should have rotted centuries ago are still partially standing due to the anaerobic conditions of the deep lake. The psychological effect on divers is well documented. Multiple accounts describe a mounting sense of unease as you descend, not from danger, because the diving itself is straightforward, but from the sheer cognitive weight of being inside a city that was lived in, loved in, and then simply erased. There's a building near the center of the submerged city that local divers call the official's mansion. Swim through its courtyard in the green filtered light of the lake, and you can still see where the garden walls stood. You can still see the threshold stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps before the water came. The 300,000 people who were displaced from this valley were given minimal compensation and relocated to areas where many struggled to rebuild their lives. Many of the elderly who were forced out died, never having returned. Their descendants say that Qiandao Lake, which is now a popular tourist destination with its 1,000 small islands and clear water, carries something heavy in it. Something that isn't just about the city at the bottom, but about the living people who were severed from their homes and their history and told to simply move on. Locals don't swim in the deep sections of the lake, they have their reasons. The ghost block of Kowloon Walled City. Kowloon Walled City no longer exists. It was demolished in 1994, and in its place stands a pleasant public park in Hong Kong where families walk their dogs and children play on swings. But the block it occupied, and the psychological legacy it left, is another matter entirely. Because for nearly 50 years, Kowloon Walled City was something that most people, if they heard a description of it without knowing it was real, would assume was fiction. At its peak in the 1980s, the walled city covered just 6.5 acres. Inside those 6.5 acres lived an estimated 50,000 people, making it the most densely populated place in recorded human history, roughly 3.2 million people per square mile. It was a self-contained city-state, technically outside British jurisdiction and practically outside Chinese jurisdiction as well, which meant it had no building codes, no zoning laws, no police presence to speak of, and no official government of any kind. The triads, organized crime syndicates, ran it. What grew inside those walls over the decades was something that architects and urban historians still struggle to categorize. Buildings were stacked on top of each other without planning, connected by improvised walkways and shared walls, climbing until they blocked out the sky above the alleyways entirely. At street level, if you could call it street level, the alleyways were never exposed to direct sunlight. They were permanently dark, permanently damp, and illuminated only by fluorescent lights that ran 24 hours a day. Residents described the interior as a place where day and night were meaningless concepts. Inside this structure existed unlicensed dentists, unlicensed doctors, drug dens, gambling operations, noodle factories, and tens of thousands of ordinary families simply trying to live. The smell, according to every account, was overwhelming. A combination of cooking, decay, chemicals, and bodies in a space with almost no ventilation. Children grew up never seeing the sky directly above them, only in narrow slices visible from rooftops they reached by climbing through the building's superstructure. The demolition was thorough. The buildings came down. The alleys were filled in. The park was built. But older residents of the surrounding Kowloon neighborhoods, people who grew up with the walled city as a fixture of their landscape, describe the park with a discomfort they struggle to articulate. It's too clean, some say, too deliberately pleasant, like a coat of paint over something that can't be painted over. The ground, where 50,000 people lived compressed lives in permanent darkness, is now where pensioners do morning Tai Chi. And some of those pensioners will tell you quietly that they don't like to be in the park after the sun goes down. The ghost city of Ordos, Kangbashi, Inner Mongolia. In 2003, the government of Inner Mongolia made a decision that seemed, at the time, like the beginning of something remarkable. They would build a brand new city from scratch in the desert, a modern, fully equipped urban center designed to house 1 million people. They would call it Kangbashi, a district of the city of Ordos, and they would fund it with coal money because Inner Mongolia happened to be sitting on one of the largest coal reserves in China. The construction budget was reported to be in the range of $161 billion. They built it, every piece of it. Broad, tree-lined boulevards wide enough for 12 lanes of traffic, gleaming government buildings, museums with world-class architecture, shopping malls stretching for hundreds of thousands of square feet, apartment towers in the hundreds, sports stadiums, schools and hospitals, public squares with enormous bronze sculptures, a library, a theatre, everything a city of 1 million people would need, except the million people. Kangbashi has been called the largest ghost city on Earth, and what makes it uniquely disturbing compared to an abandoned city is that it was never occupied to begin with. Everything is new. The streets are clean because they have never been walked on in large numbers. The shop windows are intact because very few shops ever had customers. The apartment buildings are structurally sound because no one has lived in them long enough to wear them down. It is a city frozen at the moment of its inauguration, waiting for a population that has not arrived. Journalists and photographers who have documented Kangbashi describe the experience of walking through it as profoundly destabilizing. The scale is correct. The architecture is competent. The infrastructure functions. The streetlights work. The fountains run. The government offices are staffed by administrators with very little to administer. But the human element is almost entirely absent, and the human brain, which evolved to read occupied spaces, keeps sending signals that something is catastrophically wrong with what it's seeing. It reads as a stage set. It reads as a dream. It reads as somewhere between a city and a grave. The surrounding towns and villages of Inner Mongolia regard Kangbashi with a mixture of bewilderment and superstition. There's a specific kind of unease that comes from a place that was built with tremendous intention and then left to sit. Locals say the area feels cursed, though what they usually mean by that, when pressed, is that a place built on that scale with that much hope and then left empty carries a specific kind of sadness that is difficult to be around. On windy nights, when the desert winds come through, the empty boulevards of Kangbashi produce a sound that people who've heard it describe as genuinely unsettling. All that space and all that silence designed to hold noise that never came. The Longyu Caves, Zhejiang Province. In 1992, a farmer in Longyu County, Zhejiang Province, decided to drain a pond on his land. What he found beneath the water changed everything archaeologists thought they knew about the ancient history of the region, and created a mystery that remains completely unsolved more than 30 years later. Beneath that pond was not a pond at all. It was the entrance to an enormous hand-carved cave, large enough to fit an aircraft hangar, with soaring ceilings and walls covered in precise parallel chisel marks arranged in a consistent diagonal pattern across every surface. More draining followed. More ponds, more caves. In total, 24 enormous artificial caverns have been discovered in the Longyu area, each one massive, each one precisely carved, each one covered in those same perfectly consistent tool marks. The caves are connected, forming a complex that archaeologists estimate required the removal of over 1 million cubic meters of rock. They date to at least 2,000 years ago, placing their construction during the Qin dynasty or earlier. Here is the mystery. There is no historical record of these caves. None. Zero documentation in any Chinese historical text, despite the fact that China has maintained extraordinarily detailed historical records going back thousands of years. A construction project of this scale, requiring tens of thousands of workers over many decades, removing 1 million cubic meters of rock, would have been one of the largest public works projects of its era. And yet it appears nowhere. No imperial edict ordering it, no record of labor allocation, no mention in any chronicle or geographical survey. It is as if 24 enormous caves were carved by a civilization that then erased all evidence they existed. The tool marks add another layer of strangeness. Every surface, floor, wall, ceiling is covered in the same diagonal parallel lines, spaced with a consistency that researchers have struggled to replicate without modern tools. The pattern is the same throughout all 24 caves. This suggests either a massive, highly coordinated workforce following precise instructions, or something that archaeologists haven't been able to propose a credible theory for. There are no inscriptions, no paintings, no artifacts left behind, just the carved space itself. Local people have been aware of these flooded caves for generations. They simply assumed they were naturally occurring ponds and left them alone. The behavior of avoiding them, it turns out, long predates any knowledge of what was inside. Older villagers describe an instinctive reluctance around the ponds that they attributed to simple superstition. Now that the caves have been partially drained and documented, that reluctance has a new layer. Standing inside one of the Longyu caves, looking up at a ceiling 40 feet above you, covered in tool marks made by hands that left no other trace of their existence, is one of the more genuinely unsettling experiences available to the modern traveler. The caves are open for limited tourism. But after closing time, the staff leaves quickly. The Jiangbi Underground Fortress, Shaanxi Province. Jiangbi is a small, quiet village in Shaanxi Province that has existed since at least the Sui dynasty, roughly 1,400 years ago. From the surface, it looks like any number of ancient Chinese villages. Old stone buildings, narrow lanes, a few traditional courtyard houses. But beneath it, running under the entire village in a network that took centuries to complete, is something that most visitors don't discover until they're standing inside it. One of the most elaborate underground fortresses ever constructed in China, with levels, chambers, wells, and passages that stretch for over 300 meters and in some sections have never been fully explored. The fortress was built for military defense, a place where villagers could retreat and survive extended sieges while enemies occupied the surface above them. It has 3 levels, connected by hidden staircases and concealed entrances that were designed to be invisible from above. The upper level was used for combat. Soldiers could fire arrows and throw projectiles through openings in the village walls while remaining underground. The middle level was for survival. It contained storage for food and weapons. The lower level contained wells for water. A population could theoretically live down there indefinitely. What makes Jiangbi genuinely unsettling rather than merely historically interesting is the current state of the lower levels. The upper portions of the fortress have been partially documented and opened to limited tourism. But the lower sections, particularly those that extend beyond the village perimeter, have not been fully mapped. Archaeologists working the site in the 1990s documented passages that extended further than the village above them, heading in directions that don't correspond to any known defensive purpose. Several passages end at sealed stone walls. No one currently knows what, if anything, is on the other side. Village residents, people who have lived directly above this fortress their entire lives, describe a specific unease about certain areas of the underground. Not the tourist sections. The sections beneath the older parts of the village, where the tunnels were sealed generations ago for reasons that oral history no longer explains. Children in the village are told not to play near certain cellar entrances. The prohibition is old enough that no one remembers the original reason, only that the instruction exists and has always existed. Visitors who tour the documented sections of the Jiangbi fortress consistently note the same thing. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes. And the quieter it becomes, the more your mind fills the silence with things you don't want to examine too closely. The walls are close, the ceilings are low, the lighting ends abruptly where the tourist sections end, and beyond that boundary, the passage continues into darkness, heading somewhere that hasn't been measured yet, beneath a village of people who have lived above it their whole lives and know, instinctively, to leave certain doors closed. The hanging coffins of the Bo people, Sichuan. On the sheer cliff faces along the Yangtze River in southern Sichuan province, there are coffins. Hundreds of them, some dating back 3,000 years, suspended hundreds of feet above the ground on wooden stakes driven directly into the rock face. They belong to the Bo people, a civilization that once lived throughout southwestern China and then, in the 16th century, simply vanished. No one knows why. No one knows how the coffins got where they are. And no one knows how to get them down without destroying them. The Bo people were documented by Chinese historians as late as the Ming dynasty around the 1500s. They were a distinct ethnic group with their own language, their own customs, and this highly specific burial practice, placing their dead in coffins suspended on cliffs. The higher, the better, as proximity to the sky was believed to bring the soul closer to heaven. And then, within a relatively short historical window, they were gone. There is significant historical evidence suggesting that Ming dynasty military campaigns in the region essentially exterminated the Bo people. The last surviving records of the Bo language were made by outsiders and are fragmentary at best. What remains are the coffins. Some are in clusters, stacked on wooden platforms built into the cliff face. Some are single coffins on solitary pegs, seemingly inaccessible by any means short of technical rock climbing. The oldest ones are so high and so weathered that their contents, which archaeologists who have rappelled down to reach accessible ones confirm include bones, bronze artifacts, and burial goods, have been partially claimed by rain and time, but many are still intact. 3,000 years in, and the coffins remain on their cliff faces, exactly where the Bo people left them. The cliffs have been considered cursed ground by the local populations who moved into the region after the Bo people disappeared. The reluctance isn't specifically about the coffins, it's about the cliffs themselves. Local Sichuan and Yi communities who have lived in the valley below for centuries maintain informal prohibitions against camping at the cliff base, against making loud noise near the cliff face, and particularly against attempting to retrieve anything from the coffins. The last prohibition exists for practical reasons too. Several people over the centuries who have attempted to access the suspended coffins have fallen, but the practical and the spiritual explanations have become intertwined in ways that local residents don't bother separating. Stand at the base of the Gongxian cliff face on a clear day, looking up at the wooden boxes suspended impossibly high above you, and you will feel something that is hard to articulate. It is partly the vertigo of the scale. It is partly the cognitive dissonance of knowing that human beings put those objects in those places using technology and methods that have been lost for 5 centuries. And it is partly something else. The cumulative weight of knowing that you are looking at the last physical trace of an entire people who no longer exist in any other form. The abandoned village of Hutuwan, Shengshan Island. On Shengshan Island, roughly 100 miles east of Shanghai in the East China Sea, there is a fishing village called Hutuwan. About 30 years ago, it was home to over 2,000 people. Today, it is home to almost no one, and it is being slowly consumed from the outside in by vegetation so dense and so thorough that the buildings themselves have become unrecognizable as buildings. Green walls, green roofs, green staircases, the entire village wrapped in a living layer that is simultaneously beautiful and deeply wrong. Hutuan was abandoned starting in the early 1990s, when the fishing industry in the area declined and residents gradually relocated to the mainland and to larger islands where schools, hospitals, and economic opportunities existed. The exodus was gradual rather than sudden, families leaving one by one over the course of a decade, until the last permanent residents departed and the village was left to whatever came next. What came next was the sea air, the rain, and the extraordinary growing power of the climbing plants that thrive in the island's humid maritime climate. Unlike many abandoned places, Hutuan was left in a state of midlife rather than crisis. Families didn't flee, they moved, which means they left things behind in the casual way that people leave things when they're not running. Furniture, kitchen implements, in some homes, photographs. In at least one documented case, a wall calendar stopped on a date in 1994. The personal detritus of ordinary life left in ordinary arrangements, now sitting inside rooms where the windows have been overtaken by vines and the light comes in green and filtered as if you're underwater. The handful of elderly residents who remained, by some accounts, fewer than a dozen, lived in the village until very recently, surrounded by the abandoned homes of their former neighbors. Visitors who made the boat trip to Shengshan Island over the past decade to photograph the photogenic ruin sometimes encountered these last residents who were reportedly disinclined to talk to outsiders and visibly uncomfortable with the tourism attention that the village's unusual appearance was attracting. Several described feeling that the tourists were treating their home as entertainment. They were correct. Hutuan has become an unlikely tourist destination in recent years, promoted on Chinese social media platforms for its ethereal, post-apocalyptic aesthetics. What the photographs don't capture is the sound, or the lack of it. The island is isolated enough that the ambient noise of the mainland is absent. What you hear in Hutuan is wind, the distant sea, and the sound of the vegetation moving. Occasionally, in the older sections of the village where the buildings are most fully reclaimed, something shifts in the plant growth, a stem settling, a branch adjusting, and in the silence, it sounds exactly like a footstep. Huaxi Village, Jiangsu Province, the village that isn't free. Not every creepy place looks like a ruin. Some of the most unsettling places in the world are the ones that look, on the surface, perfectly fine. Huaxi Village in Jiangsu Province has been called China's wealthiest village, and from a certain angle, it earns the description. The village, really more of a township at this point, features gleaming high-rise apartment blocks, a luxury hotel, a private airstrip, and a 328-meter skyscraper that for years was one of the tallest structures in the province. Residents were given large apartments, cars, and stipends. It looked, for decades, like a communist success story. Look more closely, and the story changes. Huaxi was built into its current form by a single man, Wu Renbao, who served as the village party secretary for decades and ran the village as a personal fiefdom with a combination of genuine economic skill and absolute social control. The village's wealth came from steel and textile factories, but the distribution of that wealth came with conditions. Residents who wanted to stay in Huaxi and enjoy its benefits were required to invest their savings back into the collective. Residents who wanted to leave faced significant financial penalties. In some accounts, they were required to forfeit not just their stipend, but their apartment and a substantial portion of their accumulated savings. Journalists who visited Huaxi in its peak years in the 2000s and early 2010s consistently described the same feeling. Something is wrong here, but it's difficult to identify precisely what. Residents smiled and gave approved answers. The village was immaculate, obsessively clean, meticulously maintained. Public speakers broadcast approved music and political messaging. Murals of Wu Renbao covered prominent walls. The man himself gave tours, conducted interviews, and presented the village as proof that collective living under proper leadership produced prosperity and happiness. The residents, standing behind him, agreed. Several former residents who left Huaxi, at significant personal financial cost, gave accounts to journalists and researchers describing the village as psychologically suffocating. The surveillance was total. Behavior that deviated from collective norms was noted, discussed, and corrected through social pressure that could escalate to economic consequences. The sense of being watched, of being evaluated, of existing within a social structure that required constant performance of contentment. These accounts describe something that sounds less like a prosperous village and more like a long-running experiment in what humans will tolerate in exchange for material security. Wu Renbao died in 2013. His son took over leadership. The village's industrial enterprises have struggled in recent years as China's manufacturing economy shifted. Some of those gleaming high-rises are reportedly less fully occupied than they once appeared. But Huaxi remains, still presenting its curated face to visitors, still operating under a system of collective ownership and social management that its residents neither fully chose nor can easily leave. It is, in its way, one of the creepiest places on this list, because what it demonstrates is not what darkness looks like, but what control looks like when it wears the face of prosperity. Wonderland Amusement Park Ruins, Beijing. About 30 miles north of Beijing, on land that was supposed to become the largest amusement park in Asia, there stand the ruins of Wonderland, a project that ran out of money in the mid-1990s and was simply left where it stood, half-built and abandoned to be reclaimed by whatever came next. What came next, in the immediate area, was farmland. Farmers moved into the footprint of the unfinished park and began growing crops between the concrete foundations, beneath the shadow of half-completed castle towers and rusted structural steel that was never covered by anything. Wonderland was conceived in the early 1990s as China's answer to Disneyland, and the ambition was genuine. The site covered nearly 100 acres. Construction began in 1994. The plans included a massive castle as the centerpiece, surrounded by themed zones with rides, restaurants, and attractions designed to attract millions of visitors annually. The project was funded by a combination of developers and local government interests, and it proceeded enthusiastically until, reportedly, a dispute over land compensation with local farmers, combined with wider economic pressures, caused funding to collapse. Construction stopped, the developers walked away, and there, the ruins sat. For nearly 2 decades, the ruins of Wonderland existed in a peculiar liminal state. The half-built castle stood. The structural frameworks of rides that were never completed stood. And around and between them, the farmers who had originally owned the land continued to farm it, growing wheat and corn in the shadow of abandoned castle battlements, setting up small market stalls in the footprint of what was supposed to be the entrance plaza. The juxtaposition was so visually striking that photographers from around the world made the trip to document it, producing images that looked less like photographs of a real place and more like illustrations for a fairy tale about economic failure. The specific texture of Wonderland's ruins is different from most abandoned places. Most ruins carry the weight of something that once functioned and then stopped. Wonderland carries the weight of something that never functioned at all, a vision that was physically constructed and then simply never completed. The rides have no memories of riders. The castle has no memories of visitors. The murals of cartoon characters that were painted on some of the walls, cheerful, bright, designed to appeal to children, have faded and cracked in the weather, their expressions distorting in ways that artists working in the genre of the uncanny couldn't have improved upon. The site was finally demolished in 2013, and a shopping mall and residential development now occupy the land. But for 19 years, it stood as one of the most quietly disturbing places in the Beijing metropolitan area. Not because of anything that happened there, but because of everything that didn't. And locals from the surrounding towns who drove past it regularly in those years will tell you that they got used to seeing it, but they never got comfortable with it. There is something specific about the sight of a place designed for the happiness of children, never used, slowly falling apart. Something that resists being looked at directly. Tiger Leaping Gorge, Yunnan, the Widow's Path. The last entry on this list is also the most visually spectacular and the most physically dangerous. Tiger Leaping Gorge in Yunnan province is one of the deepest river gorges on Earth, cut by the Jinsha River as it descends from the Tibetan Plateau. At its deepest, the gorge drops roughly 9,800 feet from the surrounding mountain peaks to the water below. The walls are sheer. The river at the bottom is a Class 5 torrent of white water, moving at speeds that make survival in it essentially impossible. And running along the upper edge of the gorge, carved into the cliff face, is a hiking trail that locals call, in translation, the Widow's Path. The trail itself is genuinely beautiful. It traverses some of the most dramatic landscape in China. Views across the gorge to the snow-capped peaks of Jade Dragon Snow Mountain, wildflowers in the spring, crisp, high-altitude air, and the distant roar of the river far below. International hikers who complete it describe it as one of the most rewarding multi-day treks in Asia. But the number of people who have died on it and the specific circumstances of many of those deaths give it a dimension that the scenic photographs don't capture. The death toll on Tiger Leaping Gorge is difficult to establish precisely because the gorge is remote. The river is extraordinarily difficult to search, and not every incident is formally reported. Conservative estimates from trekking organizations who monitor the trail put the number of deaths over the past 2 decades at somewhere between 40 and 70. The causes include falls from exposed sections, flash floods that sweep trail sections without warning, rockfall from the unstable cliff faces above, and in a number of cases, disappearances that were never resolved. Hikers who went ahead or fell behind their groups and were never found despite extensive searching. What gives the gorge its particular reputation among locals is the behavior of the search and rescue teams that cover the region. Multiple accounts from trekking guides who have worked the area for decades describe the same phenomenon. Rescue teams are extraordinarily reluctant to enter the gorge itself after dark. The official explanation involves the practical dangers. The trail is hazardous enough in daylight, and the risk of a rescue team member becoming a second casualty is genuinely significant at night. But guides who have worked with these teams say the reluctance is something beyond pure risk calculation. The gorge at night, with the river roaring invisibly far below and the cliff walls amplifying and distorting the sound, produces an acoustic environment that is unlike anything experienced on the surface. The sound seems to come from everywhere. Direction becomes meaningless. And in that environment, the gorge stops being a landscape and becomes something else. The name Widow's Path came from the families of porters who worked the old trade routes through the gorge before the hiking trail was formalized. The route has always been dangerous. Generations of Naxi people, the indigenous population of this part of Yunnan, built their villages well back from the gorge edge and maintained strict protocols about when and how the gorge could be traversed. Those protocols have eroded as the area has been developed for tourism. The result has been, predictably, more people going in with less knowledge of what they're walking into. The gorge is indifferent to that. It has been carving deeper into the earth for millions of years, and the path along its edge will eventually crumble back into it, carrying whatever is on it at the time. The locals know this. The tourists mostly don't. 12 places, 12 stories, drowned cities and demon temples, empty cities built for ghosts, caves that nobody carved, coffins that nobody can explain, and a village that forgot what it feels like to choose. China is 5,000 years of history in a country the size of a continent, and most of what happened there has never been told to the outside world. These are just 12 examples. If you made it to the end of this video, tell me in the comments which one got under your skin the most. And if you want more videos like this, the places, the history, the things that the travel guides leave out, hit subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.